I will come now to Professor Nathan. Professor Nathan, you've heard Garimaji, you've heard Gorakji, and you have this immense experience in business and human rights, and you've been part of presentations to the industry on all these matters. From your experience of worker issues and supply chain, what is, and in the context of findings that you heard today and you were aware of, what are your thoughts of the problems and its solutions?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll just start by saying, I may not be able to stay very long because I'm actually at another conference and I don't know when I'll use power using my phone to be able to participate in. Anyway, thank you for your invitation, and I must congratulate you on your report. Congratulations is a very inadequate word. It's a very striking visual of the problems that we all hear about but don't really see. So it's a very good report. I hope it gets wide circulation. I have just 3 or 4 points to make. One, we all talk about implementation, but I would raise the question, is there a policy of non-implementation, or is it just that things don't work? I think we need to answer this question. We actually are seeing a kind of race between states in the country, the government, central government also allowing it. For instance, the attempt to increase working hours from 8 to 12. I don't know for which all industries they're trying to do this, but certainly tired workers will mean more injuries. There can be no doubt about that. So I think that we have to confront with this issue whether we're not actually facing a race to the bottom and competition among the states to get employment at any cost without concern about the human cost of that employment. First point. Second point is that what really are these so-called tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 and the OEM? What does the OEM do? The OEM assembles a vehicle. It does not really directly itself manufacture it. I visited the old Hindustan Motors plant in Uttarpada, and their raw materials came in at one end and the finished car went out the other end. But here now, whether it is Maruti or anybody else or Bajaj, you have the assembly plant and you have around it all their so-called first-tier suppliers. So it really is produced through this. Now, what are these suppliers? Are they something we go and buy on the street? It's like you and I may go and buy a notebook or a pen or even a laptop. These are not things you go and buy from a vendor. These are wrong terms. These are contracted supplies. These are contracted manufacturers. They manufacture to the specifications given by the lead firm, by the brand, by the OEM. Now, therefore, they should be considered like outsourced manufacturing departments. Economically, there should be no difference in terms of responsibility between having a manufacturing section as a department of the company and one as an outsourced department of the company. So you have the outsourcing by Maruti, etc. The design is done in Japan, and the assembly plant is put up in India, and you have all these, the whole tiers of suppliers around it. So that is the first point, that this is contract manufacture. This is not a on-the-market sale or purchase of commodities like you and I carry out. That will tell you that there's a different type of responsibility which should be no different from being a department. Secondly, our law is deficient in this matter. The law makes a difference between contract labor on-site and off-site. Now, when you require the off-site labor, why should there be a difference in responsibility? That off-site contracted labor should be dealt with in the same manner as on-site contract labor. But our law does not require that. In fact, it makes a clear distinction between the two. It says that on the on-site contract labor, the principal employer is responsible for everything. But for the off-site contract labor, there is no such connection, no such responsibility. So I think the weakness in the law is also there, which allows for a harvest a very grim harvest of, I heard it for the first time, what it is called, crushed injury. I mean, I have talked to workers, but I've not heard this term before, crush injuries. So it's a very horrible term to think of, but you're really ending a person's working life, effective working life, when he loses two or she loses 2 or 3 of her fingers. There's not much that they can do after their crushed fingers have crushed their lives, in fact. So it's not just crushed fingers, it is crushed lives. Finally, everybody talks about audit, but I was reading in your report how, and I know this from experience in other industries, when the auditors are there, then things are a little better. I have visited factories, garment factories and other factories, where because they know that I'm coming from the ILO or AEPC, then everything is perfect on the factory floor. But as soon as you leave the place, then all that protective equipment just goes out to the window. It just push it to one side, and they're carrying on, risking crushed fingers and crushed working lives. So there has to be a role of the workers directly in this so-called audit. If the workers have no voice, then there is no way you can end this kind of harvest. So that voice of the workers is very critical. I hear in all of this, you get a third person audit, but I've heard managers tell me, we can buy for one audit report, one audit report, we can buy for $5,000. So having a so-called third-party audit does not help, unless the people who are affected by the lack of safety and the poor working conditions, unless they are involved, you cannot really expect to have much improvement. You'll have a little bit cosmetic improvement here and there, but you won't really change the situation. That's why workers' voice is important in all of these attempts at improving the safety of workers in the auto industry, particularly the component industry, where of course it's all through. So I will just end by saying, look, first we need a policy of compliance, of implementation, not just have laws, and then reduce the number of officials involved in their compliance inspections, and therefore you reduce the possibility of implementation. Secondly, at an economic level, these contract manufacturers should be treated as departments of the company and have to deal with or required to meet the same kind of working standards, whether it is with regard to wages or with regard to another way. It's what, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so whether it is with regard to wages or working conditions. Thirdly, along with that, there'll have to be the regulation of the way in which workloads are set down the line. Fourth, that there has to be, we have to abolish the distinction between on-site and off-site labor, contract labor, and have the principal employer responsible all through. Not just say, oh, we will have due diligence, but that doesn't make you responsible for it. You should be responsible under law for the working conditions of all those who supply your product, the parts to you. When I buy a car, or when somebody buys a car, the company is responsible for every part in that car. You can't say, oh, we bought the seat from somebody else and something happened to it. You can't say, oh, we got the airbags from some other company and we are not responsible for what happens to the airbag. If you're not responsible, if you are responsible for the quality of the airbags, you're also responsible for the employment of the workers who made those airbags. So I think that this distinction between on-site and off-site, between the brand and the suppliers, is something that needs to be changed if you're able to, in order to be able to really improve the condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nathan. You really touched on a number of systemic issues. And I think it's a really important point that sustainable change cannot be made without systemic solutions. And something we have been trying hard, the idea that supply chains have got created over decades, really to pass down the cheaper, the dirtier end of manufacturing often. Of course, it gives specialization and cost advantages, but there is a darker side to it. The idea, and you talked a lot about workers, and that's delightful because we do forget workers sitting in our head offices and doing our Excel worksheets and presentations. And a lot of time we need to spend on visiting, meeting, seeing these workers,